Today we're having a look at the most recent encounter between two future world champions of chess. The 14-year-old Yağız Kaan Erdoğmuş, who has just about the best chance that a person could possibly have of someday taking the title, being the youngest player to ever achieve his current FIDE rating of 2646, and the 22-year-old Hans Moke Niemann, who despite not being the youngest player to ever achieve his rating of 2733, has nevertheless stated with confidence that he will someday become world champion based on what we can only assume is a totally unbiased assessment of his own potential. So in Hans Niemann's world, this young upstart sitting across from him in this round 7 of the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament just might be the greatest living threat to what he's been attempting to speak into existence with both his words and his very eloquent chess. Will the young prodigy be able to hold his own against the heavy hitter like Niemann, or is he about to be put in his place? Well, you're about to find out. All I'm going to tell you is that one of these two young hopefuls is about to get savagely obliterated in a mere 26 moves by a shocking barrage of near-engine perfect brilliancies. So strap yourself to something secure, preferably in the basement or at least in a doorway, because this one's going to get wild. Hans Niemann is manning the white army, and he kicks off the game with the best possible move, because Bobby Fischer said so, e4. Yağız responds with the symmetrical e5. We have knight to f3 attacking the pawn, and now knight to f6 counter-attacking the pawn on e4. This is known as the Petrov defense, and opening that's had a reputation for being a bit drawish, and not without good reason, as it does result in about 10% more draws at the Grandmaster level compared to the more popular move knight to c6. But as this game demonstrates, it can very easily lead to a quite chaotic and imbalanced game. Hans responds with the most popular move, knight takes e5, as does Yağız with d6, driving the knight out of the center before making the recapture on e4. These are all mainline moves. Hans plays d4, staking the central claim. Yağız does the same. We have bishop to d3, knight to c6, applying a little pressure to d4, which after Hans castles is increased with bishop to g4, pinning its defender to the matriarch on d1. So Hans adds some defense with the move c3. This is a bit passive compared to the mainline move, preferred by both engines and humans alike, which is c4, when a blunderous knight takes d4 would run into bishop takes e4, d takes e4, and queen takes d4, winning a piece, due to the fact that after e takes f3, white has queen takes bishop on g4. So an important line to be aware of if you're going to be dabbling in the Petrov. After Niemann's move, the safe and sane c3, we have f5 from Yağız, just adding further support to his elegantly posted beast on e4, which he knows will be coming under further scrutiny with a move like knight b to d2, now played by Hans. Yağız throws his queen on f6. I'm loving it. He's decided to castle queenside, which of course means that the odds of this game ending in a draw just went down considerably, although the fact that I previously told you that it's not going to end in a draw did already make it pretty unlikely, though not impossible, since every now and then I do enjoy telling a random lie for no good reason, if you can believe that. Next we have a very interesting move from Moke Niemann, queen to a4. Is it the top choice of the engine? Nay, it prefers queen to c2, but it is aggressive and it poses a very concrete question to Yağız, which is, how are you going to deal with this here pin on your knight to the king, and the prospect of my horsey jumping into e5 to increase the pressure? Yağız says that's easy, I'll just castle, unpinning my knight, problem solved. But Hans now presses the issue with bishop to b5, threatening bishop takes c6, followed by queen takes pawn on a7, although an even bigger concern would be his knight setting up shop on e5 unchallenged, hitting all kinds of juicy squares. So Yağız comes up with the strong reply, he takes the knight on d2. Now if bishop takes d2, then bishop takes f3 will decimate white's kingside pawn structure. So Hans plays the better move, knight takes d2, taking knight to e5 right off the table for the moment, but there is still the threat of bishop takes knight followed by queen takes pawn on a7. Or is there? Yağız says, I don't think so. He just ignores it and plays f4, looking to bite into white's kingside pawn cover with a possible f3, while also opening a line for his light-squared bishop to possibly drop back into a defensive position. Now if Hans were to play bishop takes c6, which he does not, then after queen takes c6, it is true that he can pick up the pawn on a7. But after bishop to d6, was it really worth it? White's behind in development, he's got a sidelined queen, while black's got both of his bishops trained on his king side, plus this menacing pawn on f4. Not a very promising road. What's played in the game, in response to f4, is rook to e1. Okay, it puts a rook on an open file, that's always good, but I think I would have rather played f3 here, just to prevent black from playing it himself, which is what Yağız does now. But you want to know a little secret? rook to e1 actually did prevent f3, or at least it should have. And without getting into too many tactical tooly-weeds, I'm just going to tell you that the main reason is that if Hans had played his best move in this position, bishop takes c6, then black could at no point throw in the intermezzo f takes g2 with a counterattack on the rook, as it is no longer sitting on f1. So after the computer's favored line of play, queen takes c6, queen takes c6, b takes c6, h3 hitting the bishop, bishop to h5, rook to e5 hitting the bishop again, forcing it to move, since after g6 it would be getting trapped with g4, and something like bishop to g6, white ends up winning that wayward pawn on f3. And with his superior pawn structure and better development, he's got himself a totally winning position. So a missed opportunity by Hans, who in the game decides to play an immediate h3 first, attacking the bishop, which if it were to retreat to h5 would allow a transposition into the line that we just looked at, beginning with bishop takes c6. But in this position, because black's queen is still on f6, he's able to get away with a move that Yağız did not play in the game, f takes g2, offering white the bishop on g4, which he should not accept. For if h takes g4 were played, then black can generate a deadly attack beginning with queen to h4, threatening checkmate on h1. King takes g2 is pretty much forced, but now comes bishop to d6, threatening to come into h2. And after knight to f1, defending against that while also preparing to meet queen takes g4 check with knight to g3, black has rook d to f8, targeting f2. And the threats just keep coming, with moves like h5 on the cards, queen takes g4, or maybe even a rook sack on f2, all depending on how white tries to defend. And although it's far from obvious that black has a totally winning position here, that is what the engine is indicating, so I'm going to go ahead and take it at its word without further investigation. But as always, if you want to pause the video and delve into this mess on your own, be my guest. Getting back to the realm of mortals, Yağız does not play the correct f takes g2, but rather the incorrect bishop to h5, allowing a transposition into that line that's winning for white, beginning with Hans Moke's bishop takes c6. Yağız responds b takes c6, which unlike the previous variation, does allow him to keep the queens on the board, but after Hans's reply rook to e5 attacking the bishop, black is no better off. In fact, he's worse off, because as we're going to see, with the queens still on the board, black's king is actually in much more danger than white's. Yağız puts his queen on g6, defending his bishop, threatening mate in 1. Hans takes notice and plays g3. Next we have a very natural looking bishop to d6, a move that many a player would probably think is winning for black, attacking the rook, which white best not move lest black sack his bishop on g3 to disastrous effect. So Hans leaves his rook right where it is and plays knight to b3, threatening to meet bishop takes rook with knight to c5, covering the d7 square and so threatening mate in 2 with queen to a6 check, king to b8, and queen to b7 checkmate. Yağız can see that no exchange is worth that kind of trouble. His bishop needs to keep guarding c5, and so we instead have rook h to f8, a move that might look a bit pointless on the surface, but it's actually very sneaky. And just to show you what it does, if white were to make some pointless move here, like a3, then all of a sudden bishop takes e5 is much more playable. Now it's still losing for black if white plays queen to a6 check followed by d takes e5. We're not going to even go there though, because the point is, with the rook on f8, an immediate knight to c5 can now be met with a stunning queen sacrifice on g3, when after f takes g3, f2 check, and king to f1, attempting to block the promotion of the now defended f2 pawn, black has a checkmate in 5 moves with bishop to e2 check, king takes e2, pawn to f1 equals queen with check, king to e3, queen to f2 check, king to d3, rook to f3 check, bishop to e3, and rook takes e3 checkmate. So what a stunner of a finish that would have been. What's played in the game, in response to rook to f8, is bishop to e3, just adding some defense to that square in front of the pawn on f3, and so once again enabling white to meet bishop takes e5 with knight to c5. So we have rook d to e8, hitting that rook a second time, while giving the king an additional escape square, never a bad thing in a position like this. Hans now takes the opportunity to cash in for a little material with queen takes c6. It is a good move, maybe best. Now he's hitting the undefended pawn on d5 with 2 pieces. So, facing an imminent 2-pawn deficit, Yağız decides that it's now or never. He might as well grab that rook on e5, bringing the queens into contact. Hans responds with his only winning move in the position, queen to a8 check, driving the king to d7, after which he is able to play knight to c5 with check. Now you could try king to d6 here, defending against queen takes d5, but then the bishop on e5 is taken with check. If you recapture with the rook, then you lose a rook. If you take with the king, well, then your king's in the center and white has all kinds of winning moves. So what's played in the game is the much more sensible king to e7, preventing d takes e5 from coming with check, which means that Hans must now move his attacked queen. And after queen takes d5, black is actually up a significant amount of material. For the moment, he's got a whole extra rook for which white only has 2 pawns. So if Yağız could now move his bishop to safety, he might not only survive this ferocious onslaught, he might actually emerge with a winning position. But where is that bishop going to go? Bishop to f6 would allow a checkmate in 1 with queen to d7. You could try bishop to d6, but here we have a mate in 3 with bishop to g5 check. The king's got no moves, so you got a block. But now here comes queen to e6 check, exploiting the pin on the rook, which may not capture the queen, leaving black with the choice of either king to d8 followed by queen to d7 mate, or king to f8 and knight to d7 checkmate. So Yağız does not try to save his bishop. In the game, where after queen takes d5, he decides to try queen to f5. Is he trying to sneak into h3 and threaten some checkmate himself on g2? Kinda seems that way, but Hans now finds a beautiful reply. Pause the video if you'd like to try and spot it. It's not d takes e5, which he is actually still winning, since after queen takes h3, white still has a forced mate beginning with bishop to g5 check. But the move Hans now plays, which is bishop to g5 check, is much more convincing. Again, the black king has no moves, and if queen takes g5, then white has a mate in 2 with queen to e6 check, king to d8, and queen to d7 checkmate. So black has to put a piece in the way. Bishop to f6 would allow white to get his rook involved with check, and mate coming on the next move. So Yağız has no choice but to block with his rook. Hans now makes the engine-perfect decision to capture on e5. This is now his 11th consecutive flawless move, by the way. He's absolutely on fire, playing like a computer, fearlessly continuing to dangle that h3 pawn in front of Yağız, who's got to be getting a bit frustrated. I mean, he's only 2 moves away from forcing mate himself. But if queen takes h3 is played here, then white has a checkmate in 11, beginning with e takes f6 check, when black's best defense is going to be king to f8, though after knight to d7 check, his only legal move would be to sacrifice his queen. If g takes f6, then white can force mate with rook to e1 check, seeing that king to f8 will be met with bishop to h6 checkmate. So, very pretty stuff. What Yağız tries in the game is queen takes bishop on g5, Hans grabs the rook on f6 with check, Yağız recaptures with the pawn. Taking with the king in order to get it off of this open file wouldn't have been any better, as that would have run into a knight fork. King to f8 would have allowed knight to d7 checkmate, so the king's got to hang out on e7 for the moment, which means that white's rook will be joining the party with check, a prospect that Yağız finds so disheartening that in this position, without even waiting for Hans to play it, he resigns the game. Seeing that after rook to e1 check, king to f8, and rook takes e8 check, bishop takes e8 would be met with knight to e6, forking king and queen, and after king takes e8, white has queen to d7 check, forcing the king back to that f8 square, followed by that knight fork on e6, winning the queen. So what a crazy game. Let me know in the comments what you thought about it and who you were rooting for. I'm Team Yağız all the way. I think this kid's headed straight to the top, and maybe a lot sooner than most people realize. And there's a lot more I could say about him, particularly when it comes to comparing him to another chess prodigy that's sure to make a major dent in the chess universe, Faustino Oro. But I'm going to have to save it for a future video, so hit that subscribe button if you want to not miss out on any of my upcoming content. Leave a like, leave a comment. Those things always help the channel out immensely, and I will see you soon.